and I don't know what it's like in hockey, but in football, I know the interviewing process now is carries so much weight in the combine process
huge,
that it's like you need to get along in groups. Like your story about Central Michigan of like, you walk into the locker room and you're like, yo, these guys all have like rap sheets. Like these are, but it's, and I've had a couple guys who had records going in of like, this guy moved to this school. Everyone knows because he beat up 2 kids on his team. It's like, like there's an element of like playing nice in the sandbox because your whole career. And I think maybe especially now with football, more so now with like the transfer portal and NIL, it's like the rest of your career is walking into new weight rooms with new coaches. And it's like, the element of being coachable in a group setting. Like we have to, if you have, we'll run groups of maybe like max 14, 15, but we'll run multiple groups by the hour and a half on the 90-minute. And it's like little soft skills of if I'm talking and you're out fucking around, I don't necessarily care. But if Belichick walks through the weight room and you're fucking around, like that's going to be a problem. Right now, luckily, if you're pulling from big schools, they know this already. But if you have kids who may not have that discipline, it's like that's the reproducibility of that setting. It's like the one-to-one stuff is, I think, for like the hard skills, like you can't beat it, right? Like a good coach's eye that can be like, oh, hold on, like let's run that back, let's do that again. But there's an art form to to performing a session, and I think a lot of people want to get into the strength space from one-to-one PT. I think that's probably how we all got into it. But your first time, you have 20 sets of eyes looking at you, and you're like, oh shit, we need to be comfortable with a certain margin for error here. Like we need to program accordingly to make sure that, if I'm not eyes on for half a second, then someone's not going to get hurt. But at the same time, there's like a behavioral aspect to being in a group. One-to-one, it's like some guy pulls out his phone. I'm just going, what the fuck, dude? Leave that in your car. We went over this. But it's like, you got 20 guys on the gym floor, and it's like trying to teach some of those skills. And at the end of the day, it's like if our job is like, or my job, it's these kids need to rank high. They need to not only establish ththose good habits and behaviors of movement, but behavioral, like good habits and behaviors as far as like decorum in a weight room. Because like, as the margin for error in the NFL, like literally the joke is it stands for not for long, not National Football League.
Yeah, that's a really interesting contrast between the NFL and the NHL. NHL has a little window where obviously like the same rule applies where, when you get drafted, everyone's trying to figure out, how to control for the ones that are going to get distracted or just can't handle it mentally, emotionally, whatever it is. It's nothing worse than being a scout and, drafting somebody really high that eventually doesn't play, right? But, then once you do get drafted, there's this window where everybody's rooting for you and they want to give you time. And there's so much emphasis on development because if it happens 3 years later, 4 years later, it's fine. It's as long as it happened, right? In the NFL, you don't have that window, so it's totally
the crop
different.
There's so many people, there's so many more bodies, and then just the injury rate is super high. It's a brutal sport. That's why. I mean, it's just It's
also monopolized the funnel, right? Like there's hockey guys, you can backdoor your way into the league, right? Like you can go college route,
Play
or you
somewhere
can go
else.
the O, or you can go, Quebec Major Juniors. There's a lot of different ways to get in, which I think that creates a bit of a safety net. That creates like I think a little bit of a safer environment for players to navigate their way to the league. Like there is so much, and I think NIL and the transfer portal are going to be really, and I hate to use the word, but like really disruptive in the way people navigate their way to the NFL. Now, the NFL might have ultimately just enough power to squash it, to keep this, Pop Warner, high school, college, draft in. Like that is a straight line. I think the NHL has like a much more circuitous route to the league, and it's not as cut and dry. Where it's like, when you're dealing with player development, they can make changes. You can see changes in player development in a generation, where like hockey, you're just going to have so many different inroads.
Yeah, and a little longer careers too, more games. It's interesting. It's crazy seeing a lot of guys playing 15, 20 years now in the NHL. It's nuts. And even look at a guy like Brad Marchand, who's well known to the people in this area, the Leafs world. But he started out in the minors, like wasn't a high pick, started in the minors, worked his way up, was a fourth liner, in Boston, and then, goes on to be their captain, one of the top players in franchise history, ends up scoring 100 points in the NHL, like really good player. So that's, you don't see that as much in football. Obviously baseball, some other sports, it's a little more emphasis on development.
I think a lot of that longevity has to do, like, there's overlapping trend lines of like a player's skill trajectory over time, but also how the game changes over time. Like if you look at how hockey was played when Marchand started in the league versus now, it's a completely different game.
Very different.
Like I got away from hockey for about 10 years. Like I played a decently high level and then I stopped and went to school, kept my head in the books, and then resurfaced 10 years later when you called me in Florida. And it's like, I remember going to the Florida Panthers training camp with Andy and being most excited to see Roberto Luongo. And then Kachuk walked right by me. I was like, kid's got stupid hair. And he's like, that guy he's the best player on the team. And I was like, oh, I know his dad. I watched his dad play. I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm old. But like, you know, you watch players just, you know, they have a certain affinity to play the game a certain way, and just the stars align with the way they regulate rules and things like that. Like, could you imagine? I find Rempe to be a really interesting intersection. Right here, you have this like, you know, late 2000s style player, this Scott Stevens-esque presence that's just like fighting his first 4 games in a game that's just really not that anymore. Yeah, it's interesting to see, and that's where I think football, and you could maybe speak to this more directly. I don't see. And maybe I just don't know how to see it, but like I don't see football tactfully tactfully changing as much in the last 10 to 15 years. And maybe I'm just more sensitive. I know they dropped that drop tackle thing this year.
No, it's already changed. The running backs used to get paid a lot of money, and now they don't. I mean, that's about 10 years ago. So all the rules for like hitting the quarterback, pass interference. Right. So now the money for a bit was spread out a little bit more evenly. But now, like, if you looked at the like 2000s, in about 10 years ago, the cornerbacks were getting paid really, really high. Well, now it's the defensive ends. They're getting paid. They're the highest paid non-quarterback on the field. Now it's the right tackle and left tackle, highest paid positions on the field. So like the Ezekiel Elliott, when he was like that's the last big running, because they're not as valuable anymore. Yeah. So the rules have all changed in that way, and like, I mean, even like player safety, like what you can do to an offensive player, like in weaponize your body against him. That's like really diminished. So you can't like before you could legitimately like you would have to have a really good backup quarterback. I mean, you still need a backup, but the injury rates for quarterbacks are much lower now. They're playing a lot longer. They're not letting them get touched. Yeah. It's all so that we're kind of there.
Does the culture at the level of the individual athlete in the league, like I think I'm relatively stovepipe because I only work with guys that want to work with a guy, right? So they they take that health and safety seriously. Like you talk about, you know, weaponizing your body. It's like hockey has a history of weaponizing weapons, right? The Marty McSorley, that was insane. Oh yeah. People were like uncertain of whether or not the UFC was going to break out of some backyard wrestling thing. And then on Saturday night, Bob Cole is calling someone getting decapitated with a hockey stick. Game. Yeah. And it's like, but you know, when you start to learn a little bit about the lifestyle of those guys back in the day of like, you know, Sudafed just chilling in the, like, but I worked with Shaquille O'Neal 2 summers ago, and he was having some knee issues. I was like, all right, let's take a look. And I'm like, where's your quad? I'm like, it's missing. Like, and he just has a ball of scar tissue in the middle of his leg. He's like, yeah, they just used to shoot me up with Toradol before games. And like, how much that takes to create a fist-sized ball of scar tissue in a dude who's 7'3", 380. And it was like, but now it's like, you know, we're a little bit more forthcoming. It's like, I wonder what is like in football. Would you say on the average player is more conscious, forward thinking? Because I know hockey is like, you know, maybe just by nature of the sport, it being less aggressive, being more cerebral, and the game tending in that direction for the last 15, 20 years. Like, do football players have this sense of agency over their health as much on the average?
No. I'd say it's getting better, but half the guys in the NFL don't train. They don't lift weights.
They're just freak.
They're just better.
Yeah.
They don't last long. Their body gets chewed up. They're never the guy that. So there's two types of players in the NFL. There's guys that are there. They're him, like they're that dude, and then there's guys that shouldn't be there.